Hi everyone, and a very warm welcome back to Online Story Time. My name is Mr. F. I hope you've all had a lovely weekend. Today we're going to continue reading Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. We're going to start on chapter number 9. Please do read along with us at home. Sit back, relax and enjoy. Chapter number 9. Grandpa Joe takes a gamble. The next day, when Charlie came home from school and went in to see his grandparents, he found that only Grandpa Joe was awake. The other three were all snoring loudly. "Shh," whispered Grandpa Joe, and he beckoned Charlie to come over. Charlie tiptoed over and stood beside the bed. The old man gave Charlie a sly grin. And then he started rummaging under his pillow with one hand. And when the hand came out again, there was an ancient leather purse clutched between his fingers. Under cover of the bedclothes, he tipped it upside down. Out fell a single silver sixpence. "It's my secret hoard," he whispered. "The others don't know I've got it. And now you and I are going to have one more fling at finding that last ticket. How about it, eh? But you'll have to help me." "Are you sure? Are you really sure you want to spend your money on that, Grandpa?" Charlie whispered. "Of course I'm sure," spluttered the old man excitedly. "Don't stand there arguing. I'm as keen as you are to find that ticket. Here, take the money and run down the street to the nearest shop and buy the first Wonka bar that you see. Bring it straight back to me and we'll open it together." Charlie took the little silver coin and slipped quickly out of the room. In just 5 minutes he was back. "Have you got it? Have you got it?" whispered Grandpa Joe, his eyes shining with excitement. Charlie nodded. "I've got it." And he held out a bar of chocolate. Wonka's Nutty Crunch Surprise. "Good," the old man whispered, sitting up in the bed and rubbing his hands. "Now come over here and sit down next to me and we'll open it together. Are you ready?" "Yes," Charlie said. "I'm ready." "All right, you tear off the first bit." "No," Charlie said. "You paid for it. You do it all." The old man's fingers were trembling most terribly as they fumbled with the wrapper. "We don't have a hope, really," he whispered, giggling a bit. "You do know we don't have a hope, don't you?" "Yes," Charlie said. "I know that." They looked at each other and both started giggling nervously. "Mind you," said Grandpa Joe, "there is just that tiny chance that it might be the one. Wouldn't that be great?" "Yes," Charlie said. "Of course. Why don't you open it, Grandpa?" "All in good time, my boy, all in good time. Which end do you think I ought to open first?" "That corner, the one furthest from you. Just a tiny bit, but not quite enough for us to see anything." "Like that," said the old man. "Yes. Now, just a tiny bit more." "Oh, you finish it," said Grandpa Joe. "I'm too nervous." "No, Grandpa, you must do it yourself." Oh, very well then. Here goes. He tore off the wrapper. They both stared at what lay underneath. It was a bar of chocolate and nothing else. All at once, they both saw the funny side of the whole thing, and they burst into peals of laughter. "What on earth is going on?" cried Grandma Josephine, waking up suddenly. "Nothing," said Grandpa Joe. "You go on and back to sleep." Chapter number 10. The family begin to starve. During the next 2 weeks, the weather turned very cold. First came the snow. It began very suddenly one morning, just as Charlie Bucket was getting dressed for school. Standing by the window, he saw the huge flakes drifting slowly down out of an icy sky that was the colour of steel. By evening, it lay 4 feet deep around their tiny house. And Mr. Bucket had to dig and dig and dig a path from the front door just to get to the road. After the snow, there came a freezing gale that blew for days and days without stopping. And oh, how bitter cold it was. I had to put my scarf on. Oh, can you feel the cold at home? Oh. Everything that Charlie touched seemed to be made of ice. And each time he stepped outside the door, the wind was like a knife on his cheek. Simile. Inside the house, little jets of freezing air came rushing in through the sides of the windows and under the doors, and there was no place to go to escape them. The 4 old ones lay silent and huddled in their beds, trying to keep the cold out of their bones. The excitement over the golden tickets had long since been forgotten. Nobody in the family gave a thought now to anything else except the 2 vital problems of trying to keep warm and trying to get enough to eat. There is something about very cold weather that gives one an enormous appetite. Most of us find ourselves beginning to crave rich, steaming stews and hot apple pies and all kinds of delicious warming dishes. And because we are all a great deal luckier than we realise, we usually get what we want, or near enough. But Charlie Bucket never got what he wanted because the family couldn't afford it. And as cold weather went on and on, he became ravenously and desperately hungry. Both bars of chocolate, the birthday one and the one Grandpa Joe had bought, had long since been nibbled away, and all he got now were those thin, cabbagey meals 3 times a day. Then, all at once, the meals became even thinner. The reason for this was that the toothpaste factory, the place where Mr. Bucket worked, suddenly went bust and had to close down. Quickly, Mr. Bucket tried to get another job, but he had no luck. In the end, the only way in which he managed to earn a few pennies was by shoveling snow in the streets. But it wasn't enough to buy even a quarter of the food that the 7 people needed. The situation became desperate. Breakfast was a single slice of bread for each person now, and lunch was maybe half a boiled potato. Slowly but surely, everybody in the house began to starve. And every day, little Charlie Bucket, trudging through the snow on his way to school, would have to pass Mr. Willy Wonka's giant chocolate factory. And every day, as he came near to it, he would lift his small pointed nose up into the air and sniff the wonderful sweet smell of melting chocolate. Sometimes he would stand motionless outside the gates for several minutes on end, taking deep, swallowing breaths, as though he was trying to eat the smell itself. "That child," said Grandpa Joe, poking his head from underneath the blanket one icy morning, "that child has got to have more food. It doesn't matter about us. We're going too old to bother anyway. But a growing boy, he can't go on like this. He's beginning to look like a skeleton." "What can one do?" murmured Grandma Josephine miserably. "He refuses to take any of ours. I hear his mother tried to slip her own piece of bread onto his plate at breakfast this morning, but he wouldn't touch it. He made her take it back." "He's a fine little fellow," said Grandpa George. "He deserves much better than this." The cruel weather went on and on, and every day Charlie Bucket grew thinner and thinner. His face became frighteningly white and pinched. The skin was drawn so tightly over the cheeks that you could see the shape of the bones. It seemed doubtful whether he could go on much longer without becoming dangerously ill. And now, very calmly, with that curious wisdom that seems to come so often to small children in times of hardship, he began to make little changes here and there. Some things that he did, and some things that others did to him. In the mornings, he left the house 10 minutes earlier so that he could walk slowly to school without ever wanting to run. He sat quietly in the classroom during break, resting himself whilst the others rushed around outdoors and threw snowballs and wrestled in the snow. Everything he did now, he did slowly and carefully to prevent exhaustion. Then, one afternoon, walking back home with the icy wind in his face and incidentally feeling hungrier than he had ever felt before, his eye was caught suddenly by something silvery lying in the snow. Charlie stepped off the curb and took a closer look to examine it. Part of it was buried under the snow, but he saw at once what it was. It was a 50p piece. Quickly, he looked around him. Has somebody dropped it? Has somebody dropped it? No, that was impossible because of the way part of it was buried. Several people went hurrying past him on the pavement, their chins sunk deep in their collars of their coats, their feet crunching in the snow. None of them was searching for the money. None of them was taking the slightest bit of notice over the small boy crouching in the gutter. Then, was it his? This 50p? Could he have it? Carefully, Charlie pulled it out from under the snow. It was damp and dirty, but otherwise perfect. a whole 50 pence. He held it tightly between his shivering fingers, gazing down at it. It meant one thing to him. At that moment, only one thing. It meant food. Automatically, Charlie turned and began moving towards the nearest shop. It was only 10 paces away. It was a newspaper and a stationery shop, the kind that sells almost everything, including sweets and cigars. And what he would do, he whispered quickly to himself, he would buy one luscious bar of chocolate and eat it all up, every bit of it, right then, right there. And the rest of the money he would take straight back home and give to his mother. And that's all for online story time today. I hope you enjoyed listening to the story and reading along at home. We'll see you again tomorrow, but in the meantime, stay safe, keep smiling, and be lucky.